We good?
Good.
Good. Awesome. Hi guys. Again, I'm Guillermo. I'm a product manager at NVIDIA. I specialize in some of our competitive gaming products, and I work on some other cool AI projects, or at least I think are cool. What you're seeing here is Project G-Assist. Project G-Assist is a tech demo. And what it's intended to showcase is how developers and the community can build AI assistants for their favorite games and applications. The prototype can do two things today. One is it can provide game-specific guidance for this game. This is Ark Survival Ascended. So we built this in collaboration with Studio Wildcard. And it can help you with a bunch of different questions about the game. You can see already that I've been trying it out with some questions like, what do you think the best armor in the game is? What do you think the best weapon in the game is? Can you explain how the weight mechanic works in this game? There are a lot of AI models that are running concurrently. I'll show you some. So for example, again, just whether you're a newcomer to the game, you're learning how to play for the first time, or if you're an expert and you want to find a specific item that's the best one for your build. But let's try something simple to start so I can say, hey, how do I craft a stone hatchet? So the ASR is, or the automatic speech recognition is running locally on this 4090. And what it's doing is, here you hear the text-to-speech, that's running over the cloud.
The required materials are 10 thatch, 1 flint, and 1 wood. You can craft it directly in your inventory.
Yeah, so it's telling me, these are the materials you need for stone hatchet. You need to be a particular level. This is how many points you need to unlock it. And the same goes for questions about bosses, quests, dialogue options, whatever you might want to find out. Sometimes you want to explore and go in blind into a game for yourself. Other times you just want to look stuff up, and that's really common. So that's one portion of it. But there's also vision models that are running locally in the game. So I'm not going to specify what I'm looking at. I'm just gonna say, what's that dinosaur over there? I'm not going to specify what dinosaur it is. I expect it to recognize what it is just by looking at the game window.
The dinosaur in the center mid area of the screen is a triceratops.
It's interesting that it's specifying where exactly it is, and that's because it can see that there's another animal that was behind it. I've often seen it say, the one in front of you is a parasaur, and the one on the left is a triceratops. But it's not limited to just the characters or the dinosaurs or the creatures. It can also understand different menus. Like for example, you can imagine asking it, I want you to analyze my stats and analyze my build. What do you think I should level up next? That's that's something that we often like to experiment. Other times we often look up metas and stuff like that. It can also understand like inventory icons. So it recognizes a triceratops. So I'm going to say, do I have anything that could help me tame the triceratops? And there's a lot of useless stuff in my inventory that would not help me. But
yes, you have a bow in your inventory. You can use it with trank arrows to knock out the triceratops for taming. Additionally, you will need berries or kibble as food for taming.
Right, so I do have tranquil. That's actually the easiest way to knock it out because it has a lot of health. So you would knock it unconscious with a tranquilizer arrow, and then you would feed it berries, which I do have, and kibble, and then you would tame it. And this is actually one of the most looked up questions for this game because the game doesn't tell you how to tame a dinosaur. So that's one of the use cases, which is game-specific guidance. Before I move on to the other use case, any questions so far?
Who provide this learning data, by the game studio or by the user?
You're asking where does the data
comes
come
from?
That's a great question. So let's talk about a little bit of the architecture of how this works. So it takes in text or voice from the user. Then it's trying to analyze constantly what's happening in the game window, as we saw using vision models. At the center of it is the brain, which is a large language model. In this case, the large language model is running in the cloud. It has not been trained with Ark Survival Ascended information. Instead, it's using what we call a RAG, which is a vectorized database containing a lot of insightful knowledge about this game. And yes, it is coming from Studio Wildcard and their official wiki, which contains a lot of really in-depth information. And what's good about that is that, say, if Studio Wildcard wants to update their game tomorrow, and they add 10 new dinosaurs and a lot of content, then they don't need to retrain a whole model. Of course, they can if they want to, but since the information is coming from a constantly updated source, the assistant is very accurate, very insightful, and we envision being able to give these tools to developers, but also the community, like wikis or press, like IGN, and all these others that have walkthroughs, that have a lot of knowledge about the game, to be able to leverage these tools to bring these sorts of assistants to life.
What does the RAG stand for? Retrieval?
Retrieval augmented generation.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions? If not, I'll move on to the other use case. The other use case is it can help provide system information and actually increase the performance and efficiency of your PC through basic commands. So, basic questions again. What's my FPS and PC latency? So it's going to be accessing telemetry that's available to the system through frame USDK. For example, it's telling me my
The
FPS
current
is
average frame rate in Arc Survival Ascended is 74 FPS, and the PC latency is averaging 38 milliseconds.
That's cool, but let's ask it something more complicated. I want you to graph my CPU and GPU utilization over the last 2 minutes. And it's going to access that same sort of telemetry. I can specify the time length.
The graph.
And here you can see, I'm going to turn the TTS down so I can speak over it. But here it is. It plotted my GPU utilization, my CPU utilization. You see these spikes here? That's when I was toggling between menus, which is really cool. But if these were actual bits in software performance, then you could go back and say, like a minute ago, I swear I had a hitch. I wonder what happened. And you can actually download the data and inspect it in a CSV to try to understand what's going on. And the same is true for FPS, for PC latency, for temperature, for all sorts of system-related information. It can optimize your graphic settings, similar to how NVIDIA app does it. It can overclock your GPU by simply asking for it. But I have one neat use case. Let me turn off the text-to-speech. Here you can see that I can use different models. It's intended to be like a plug-and-play. So I'll say, this is a 4090, so what's my power usage? I expect it to be something like 300 watts or something like that. Okay, 277. So what I'll say is, what was my FPS? Something like 70? I'll say, I want you to make my PC more power efficient, but don't let it drop under 60 FPS. And what it's going to do, it's intelligently understanding the request and calling different GPU functions. It's going to downclock the clock speed of the GPU such that it consumes less power while respecting a frame rate target. You can imagine that you could do the same thing for graphic settings, for example. Hey, can you bump up my image quality settings, but I want you to at least maintain 120 FPS. It already did it, but let me graph it for you. Graph, and I don't have to talk to it, obviously, I can just text. Graph my FPS and power usage in the last 3 minutes. And then it'll be able to showcase the optimization that it just issued. And here you go. So the red is the FPS. You can see that it was between 80 and 70. After the optimization took place, it's hovering around 60 FPS. The blue is the power usage. We were about 300 watts, and now for a marginal decrease in performance, I'm at 170 watts, which is pretty cool. So you can imagine this is excellent for power-limited scenarios, maybe for laptops, something like that. And the amount of stuff that it can do is, numerous. We would not finish this demo today if we kept on showcasing, but I want to make sure that I can answer any questions you guys may have.
The demo you showed us the dinosaur type of things. It's a lag system, so the AI system goes to the internet.
No, it's
No?
not connected online.
No, online.
No.
Oh.
The RAG is stored locally. That's how it's able to index everything so quickly.
Could you like load it with data yourself? Like say you get a game FAQs.
Yeah, I've done it myself. So let me show you an example. So as I mentioned, I mostly focus on our competitive gaming products. So I'm going to ask it something very specific. What's the difference between ultra low latency mode in the driver and NVIDIA Reflex? And so this is something I felt was important for this assistant to be able to know. And I provided that information in the supplementary information in the RAG. And here it's correctly identifying that ultra low latency mode is a driver feature. It reduces the pre-rendered frame queue, whereas Reflex is a more comprehensive tech that is integrated into the game to reduce latency. And that's what I meant. Like, press or the wikis can have full control over what's in the content, whether that's like game knowledge or meta or preferences, etc., etc.
So when and how can we get the new log data?
When and how?
How can we provide the new data to the system?
I see. So you're asking.
So you said we don't need to access the internet or the server. So how can we get new?
The developer would be changing it or choosing what is within the RAG. Yeah.
So ordinary user cannot make the data, additional log data.
I see what you mean. I don't know that that's a use case that we have considered. Ultimately, we're like
technically possible,
and we're trying to understand what would be helpful. The initial use case that we thought of is, we'll give it out to the developers and the community as a tool set eventually, if there's interest, and then they can build an AI assistant that aligns with their objective, whether it's a game or a creative application, someone wants to learn how to use Unreal Engine or something like that. But we're collecting feedback and feature requests.
And one more thing, how can the system recognize the internal information like the power and the GPU?
It's calling GPU functions and using telemetry available to NVIDIA, for example, or
in real time, of course.
Panel. And in particular, it's using the FrameView SDK to collect the telemetry like FPS, PC latency, 1% low, temperature, CPU, GPU utilization. But you can imagine that when developers get their hands on this, I'd be able to say, hey, disable eCores, disable hyperthreading. I want you to increase my polling rate of my Logitech mouse to 8K, decrease my DPI to 400. So there's a lot of possibilities that would be kind of cool.
How much of the GPU power, workload, is consumed by using this system?
Great question. So this is a hybrid configuration, right? So I can say to you, oh, look how amazing it's running on this 4090, but then you'd be like, well, the LLM is running on the cloud, so that's not fair, is it? But that is also not fair because the LLM itself could be a small fine-tuned model that could run locally perfectly well. Ultimately, the developer is going to leverage something that we call the AI Inference Manager, which is controlling the execution of different models, and they can happen either at the cloud level or at the local level, and they will decide what the minimum specifications of hardware will be such that the user experience is not impacted. If it's a high-end card, for example, you might envision that this can all run locally. If it's a lower-end card, but users still want the experience, you can envision that it could run all in the cloud. It's all about providing flexibility and to whatever the developer wants.
And do you have a date when it will be available for?
I know it's just a tech demo, but it'll be up to the developers to implement this. I mean, obviously, Studio Wildcard was very, very interested, but at this point, we're just collecting feedback, and I'd be curious to hear if folks are excited, if they feel like it'd be useful for various applications, because I feel like it would, but we'll see.
So this would actually be coming on the actual game, with the game itself, not a separate app.
Great question. So there's options, right? So this is not integrated into the game. This is running on an overlay similar to NVIDIA app. So you can imagine that it could be available through NVIDIA app or GeForce Experience. It could be a standalone client or app. Or Studio Wildcard, for example, was interested in integrating this into the game because they cared about the UI, for example. They wanted to have control over it. And so, again, the idea, this guy got really close. So the idea would be to just give them options. If they want to integrate it into the game, cool.
Could you just like run it anyway, even without the developers like permission? Because it's
I feel like that wouldn't be sensible. I mean, you know, for example, if we give it to the game wikis and the game wikis build it, I think that they would need the developers' consent, and I don't see any reason why that wouldn't happen. But ultimately, the game is the developers, and the app is the developers. But it's a, you know, it's an ecosystem thing where, you know, without the wikis and the great content that people publish, the game might not do as well. Maybe there's some, like I think of FromSoft, for example. Like their games have. They make no effort of making the game less obscure, and that is by design or less difficult. But that doesn't stop the wiki from, or people from making 1-hour videos about it that we love to watch, for example. And I bet you that the developers love that, because otherwise, you know, there's a few people that would be quite confused about it. You know?
I'm kind of interested in the export process, or you kind of touched on the fact that if IGN wants to host a game guide, that's possible through this. You know, what's the process going to be like for that? Is that up to the developer to kind of give them permission? And is that going to be, you know, not that it displaces YouTubers who kind of run through strategy guides and websites, but, you know, what's the process there on how that's hosted and how it's distributed? That data?
You're asking me what would be the process once an SDK, let's say, becomes available and we give it to an IGN, for example. What would be the process on IGN's?
Right. Would you be giving it to websites and YouTubers and they kind of take it, you know, to make it their own or make content around it, or is that up to the developer? How's that work?
I think that it would be up to the developer of the AI assistant themselves, and then I'm not entirely sure what the mechanics would be in terms of like requesting permission from the developer and stuff like that. And I think you mentioned displacing like YouTube guides and stuff like that.
Right. That's out there now. That's how people, you know, the Prima guides and all the...
Yeah. I have my opinions about this. I feel like I mentioned before, there's some times where I just want to watch a 1-hour long Vaudi video about Elden Ring. There's other times where I just want to read the wiki. And there's other times where I'm like in game running away from a dinosaur that wants to eat me, and I literally just want a hotkey to say, is that thing going to kill me? What do I do? So it's just a different interface, and I think it's meant to enhance the ecosystem, not replace it, because after all, like this is the community that would be building it. It's just a different interface, I guess.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
One simple question: is this a system for just the NVIDIA GPU users, or just GPU users?
You know, since this is just a prototype, I don't think that there's been any decisions about that. But the fact is that since it can run on the cloud, the idea would be that you know, anybody can access it, right? This is meant as a vision to say, these AI models can do this today. So why don't you guys go and build it?